We'll be alright. We'll do it.
There we go. No turning back now. Guys, I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes just for everybody to get logged on, and then we'll get started. This is the awkward bit.
Yeah. If you get a stand, you have a face in the sign, like Ella, you know, so it just focuses on that and it's all name. Just gives it a lot.
Yeah.
Like BBC.
Alright, literally give it another minute or two and then we'll get cracking. Okay, so I'm just going to flip this round and show you what we've done so far. So I literally just put a few foils in just to get me started. Time-wise, the way these lives are going to work is I'm going to do hour segments. So it's going to be, they can only be 1 hour long. So after each video, we're going to stop it and restart it. So if it does cut off after the hour, don't panic. We'll just be saving the previous live and then starting another. So I've just put in a few foils on the hairline just to save a bit of time, but what I have done is I've videoed me doing this, so you're not going to miss out on this. I will post it to the page after. I'm going to walk you through the section and technique first. So this is obviously for full head highlights. My client's parting runs through the middle of this, so I'll take you to the front. She parts her hair almost just off center, so it's right down the middle of this section. So I know a lot of you probably want to draw out this section. Again, before I put any of these foils in, I have got photos and videos of it, so I'll be posting that to the page again, so you'll be able to save that and screenshot it or whatever. So don't panic now if you're not seeing everything individually. So what I'm going to do is you can see obviously my clients, this is all our natural color, like natural base 5, 6. We're going to lighten all this, so do a full head of like textured highlights. What I am going to do though then is add a root shadow and blend it out. But before I do so, I'm going to show you how this highlight technique, how it sits on the part and how it doesn't give that kind of traditionally striped liney look. So before we do tone it, we'll obviously be splitting it and letting you have a look at it wet and seeing that obviously there's no lines or whatever anywhere, and then we'll root shadow it all down. This is John Paul. He's going to be on camera, so any questions, anything you need me to break down, repeat, or if you can't, I know some of you's English isn't your first language. If he's not picking up on what I'm saying, just ask John Paul to repeat whatever I said and we can get it broke down. Or even if I'm doing something and you're not maybe understanding why I'm doing it or what I'm doing it for, just type a message in here. John Paul will be able to see it and then we can break it all down for you. So we're gonna just get cracking now. What I've mixed up is I'm using 1.9, so I'll grab it here. So Color Touch 1.9, I'm using it with Blondor. I'm obviously just starting low and slow at the back because usually this process takes me about 2 hours in the salon, but because today we're breaking it down, the foils are going to be in a lot longer. So just to give those foils time to lift, we're using obviously a lower developer, and then we're going to go and sort of gradually work higher as we get to the front. So with my foils, they're all going in at an angle, and that angle was obviously determined on just the angle of her hairline. So first foil in is the angle of her hairline, and then gradually as we go up, we're gonna almost start to turn these foils ever so slightly. So our last foil is probably gonna sit straight across the head like that, so completely horizontal. Then as we come to the top sections here, obviously you can see that these sections get finer and finer towards the top. So as we get close to the top, we're probably gonna add these two together and just create about 3 or 4 sections to place foils in here. You can see as well that with these back sections, because we split it in two, obviously the back of the head always has a lot more hair, so because we split these in two, it's definitely important to drop this section behind your client's ear. If I was to take it to the top of their ear, I would have another inch of hair to try and include in my foil. So I am using the Framer wider foil, which obviously gives me good coverage. So it just means that I can split this back section in two rather than work one up the middle and 2 up the sides, or try create 3 different sections. So it's easier and it's just more time efficient to split everything in two. So you can see just how thick I'm taking my sections. Obviously this will determine how much lightness I add in towards the root. I'm not looking to go mega bright at the root. If I was, then you can obviously just tweak these sections to suit whatever you're going to do. So you can go a bit finer or a bit thicker if you want, and obviously add or leave out more depth or dimension at the root. So my foils, the weaves that I'm taking are almost like, I call them like broken slices. So they're quite textured rather than like your traditional real fine baby light. I'm going in more textured. What that does is it just leaves more depth throughout underneath, and it just gives more of that ribboned effect rather than coverage. It gives more like dimensional pieces. So although I'm gonna add these highlights and then add a root shadow and blend it out from the root, I'm still taking everything up to the root. I did have one person comment and ask, why do you paint it blonde to the root and then tone it down? One, I'm painting it blonde to the root today for you to see, because not everybody's gonna use a root shadow or tone it down at the root. You know, this can be applied to any blonde service, so any service that you're using foils, it can be applied to like a half head, full head, T-bar sections. So if your clients are blonde and want to remain blonde at the root, that's why I'm showing you how to obviously take it to the root, and then we're just going to customize it slightly and just tweak it ever so slightly just to create a bit of a different effect. I just want to try to show you as much as possible on the one head. Plus as well, if you are taking your blonde right to the root and then shadowing out, so adding like a root shadow or root melt, anything like that, you've got to remember that the colors that you're using to tone that out and to melt it down are only semi-permanent. So when your semi-permanent colors start to fade, you want a nice even lift. So if I was to kind of blend my foils up in, as the root shadow fades, you're going to start to see lines reappear. So you want your lines to be as clean as possible, which is why we always take it right to the root. So it's not massive angles that I'm adding every time. I'm literally just every section, I'm going a little bit more, a little bit more, and a little bit more. So I'm gradually getting up horizontal up here. And the reason I kind of like to work the foils on an angle is just because your hair falls straight down, adding them on an angle just breaks everything. It kind of distorts it, so it just takes it out of its normal, and rather than your straight foils falling straight down, they're just all falling at an angle, which just makes the hair look a bit more natural from the root. And with your weaves, you can almost, I call them like consistently inconsistent. You can go a little bit thicker with one, a little bit finer with another. They don't have to be like the exact same all the time. It just adds a bit of variation, and it doesn't have your highlights looking so uniform then really. You can see just the width of those foils, they're so good. I could probably add a bit more to that, but I think any thicker than that, it just gets a bit trickier to work with, and it's just harder to get to the root then. So I want to make sure that I can still paint these foils nice and clean to the root. Obviously just saturating it the whole way down. You'll notice as well that my foils are quite long, so I don't really like to have, you'll see sometimes people when they're highlighting, they'll paint down, they'll fold the hair back up, paint into it, fold it back down and paint. I find that is where you can kind of get uneven lift, because you're not getting even saturation the whole way down through. So you'll find that in those folds, you maybe miss out on getting a bit of colour, and that's obviously where dark spots sit, and it's going to lift quite uneven then. Whereas I cut my foils to length, it just allows me to get good saturation from root stems. What I'm going to do this next foil is break down just the way I fold my foils and why I do it. So keeping that spacing the same the whole way through. And you notice as well that although I've taken that section that thick, my weaves, I'm not picking my weaves from midway. If I was to do that, what that'll do is leave too much bulk at the root. So you can see if I was to fold a foil on that, that would not sit in neat. So all I'm really doing is picking my foils right from the root, and I'm almost just picking that top layer. You'll see I'm not going all the way through, I'm not weaving all the way through, I'm literally just picking that top layer off it. By doing that then it just allows me to get in nice and clean to the root. So I always flip foil forward, then get it nice and neat at the root. The reason I flip it over the comb now, so I know some people just sit the foil in underneath, but I like to get it under the comb and get it tucked right in. That way I can get good pressure on it. Pull down. So you can see how clean that is to the root. Never go in and apply your brush full of product directly on the root. I always go a bit down below first, and then you can work up. Because if you add too much product to the root, you're running the chances that you can lead to bleeding then. So anytime your brush runs dry of product, keep adding new product. So you just want it to look white the whole way down, no dark pieces. Then what I'll do is fold it once, and then the second fold is where I take it right to the root. Then what I do is I'm lifting up, and underneath I'm going to put the comb in and tuck that right into the root and pull. So what that does is just gets that tucked right in underneath, and then I'm going to fold this either corner, either edge. So by doing that, you've just tucked that foil in super tight, so it shouldn't go anywhere. So especially in delicate hairline foils, you want your foils to sit super tight, so when you're doing finer sections and finer pieces, your foils can be inclined to slide out. So by doing this, your foils shouldn't go anywhere. They should be good and firm.
Do you prefer using powder bleach in foils rather than a paste?
So I use Blondor for everything. Whether I'm freehanding, foiling, scalp bleaching, literally it's the only bleach that I use. And the reason I use Blondor is because, one, because of the lift. I'm never disappointed with the lift, and two is just the consistency of it. I always tweak my ratio just to suit what I'm doing. So if I'm freehanding, I can tweak it to freehand. If I'm foiling, I can tweak it to grip the foils that little bit better. Plus, because it's a cream bleach, it always just goes on so smooth. So you can see that there's literally no grains in that. It sits so smooth on the hair. And it never swells. So blonder doesn't swell, so it's not like, I know a lot of bleaches do swell, so that's why I can afford to paint so close to the root and be comfortable that that bleach isn't going to swell and give me a nice lightened piece at the root.
What ratio do you mix your lightener?
Generally when I'm highlighting, it's 1 to 1.5, but again that can vary. I'll always tweak it just to suit the client's hair texture. So if it's thicker hair, I'm gonna have it that little bit runnier, and if it's finer hair, I'm gonna have it that little bit thicker. And that can change as well in different areas of the hair. Sometimes I'll mix up a hairline bleach separate and have it just that little bit thicker, so I know those foils are sticking right at the root.
Have you added Bond Builder? Which one?
Yeah, so I've added Brazilian Bond Builder, so it's B3. You probably see me talk about it on my profiles. So I add it in with every lightning service. Again, it sort of does what it says on the tin. It just allows you to just be a bit more creative and have the insurance there and know that your client's hair isn't going to turn into chewing gum, really. But yeah, well, with that being said, you've got to really obey by all the rules of mixtures. And you know, if it says add 3.5 mils to 30 grams of bleach, you've got to do that. I know a lot of people, when they're adding bond builders, they're kind of just going, yeah, that'll do, you know, and chucking a bit in. You've got to be really consistent with measuring, because if you're only using half the recommended amount of bond builder, then you're only getting half the protection, really. So definitely I would advise really measuring out the amount that you use. And then if you're using too much as well, you could dilute your colour, dilute your lightener down, and dilute your colours down. And that's one thing that I found about B3 is because it's oil based, it keeps your bleach quite creamy. I know when I was using other bond builders, they were water based, so they were quite, they were nearly, I found they were definitely diluting down my lightener, whereas B3 definitely doesn't. I don't have to like bump up my developer or bump up my lightener when I use it. I just keep it the same. So you can see as I'm reaching the top, these foils are almost going in horizontal now. I'll probably do this one and then one more.
If time wasn't an issue for you, would you still be using the 1.9 or would you have moved to a 3?
It just depends what I wanna achieve, really. We're not going for massive lightness today. I do want to get it sort of somehow up to like a level 8, 9. But generally, I'll never really lift the hairline with anything more than 1.9. So I'll always do the hairline 1.9. That's just a habit, because I think for me, there's nothing worse than seeing like this perfect creamy blonde and their hair tied up and they've just got a broken hairline all the way around. So I'm always quite aware when I'm highlighting hairlines that I don't want to overcompensate or overcolor and add any more damage to the hairline. So I'm always quite delicate with it. Plus again, I take my hairline sections that bit finer. And if you're taking them finer and adding the right amount of product, then you're always going to get lift, unless there's obviously a previous build up of permanent colour. Then I'll never use anything stronger than 4% on the hairline. So if time wasn't the issue today, I probably would have started with almost like 3%. So it's 1.9 and 4%. So it kind of takes it to like a 3. I'll cocktail the two of those. So I'll maybe start 1.9 and 4, and then by the time I'm here, I might mix a new batch and do 4%, then 20%, and then maybe mix 20 and 30 for the top, and do like 25 for.
Would you ever do foils or balayage without a bond builder?
No. I literally haven't coloured hair without bond builder in I would say about 6 years.
And do you include it in your prices?
So yeah, I don't, that's one thing that I do. I don't give the option of paying extra for it. I just include it in the prices and that's it. And personally, I think that everybody should sort of do the same, because if you give somebody the option, you're basically saying, do you want to spend £20 extra on your hair, or do you want to not? You know, and 9 times out of 10 people will go, nah, do you know what, it's fine, I'll get it next time. When really they're coming to you, the professional, for advice. You should be the one saying, you know, this is what you're getting and this is why you need it. And they should sort of respect that decision, rather than say, you know, no, I'm not getting it this time because, you know, I don't want to.
Would you add that to any colour service, or is it only for blonde services?
Only when I'm lightening. What I also do as well is add B3 in some root touch-ups, so root tints. Because it's oil based, if you're covering greys, it just drives the colour that little bit further into the hair, so you just get better coverage when you're using B3 with your permanent tints on your roots. Not even permanent, even just semi-permanent. So that is all I'm going to work up to for now. I'm going to bring this other side up to match this. These pieces that are dropped out, I'm going to come through and add some tip outs to them. So although there is a good bit left out, we're still going to cover some of these and lighten some of these ends and blend them up into the rest. Because I've folded my foils on both sides, it just allows me to be nice and neat and keep that right up, keep these foils nice and neat to that line that I've added. It just means that if you weren't neat with folding these and weren't consistently straight, and some of these were overlapping that parting line that you've put in, you're not going to get that coverage right down here. You're not going to be able to take those foils right to that line.
What ratio do you recommend when dealing with a client with a blocky blonde colour, looking for more contrast and dimension?
That is probably a question that I can't answer, because I would need to obviously know they're natural. So what you're looking to do, basically, whether it's a root touch up, what you're looking to do in the ends. I would always just be careful when overlapping bleach onto pre-lightened hair. So ratio wise, it shouldn't really matter. It's obviously just what developer you're using. And if you're looking to add dimension, you might have to think about adding some depth back into the hair, so adding some lowlights, which I think a lot of people, lowlights are nearly frowned upon now. You know, everyone, I sort of mentioned lowlights and people, you can see people's faces screw up, but essentially you're just adding the natural depth back into the hair to really get that blonde to pop. You're not adding black stripes like lowlights were 10 years ago. You're just trying to work off your client's natural base and add depth back in. Without depth, there's no dimension. You know, you need the dark with the light. What you can do as well is, if you find that time is a bit of an issue for you when you're working your sections, you can do, I done all that side first and then I'm going to do all this side. What you could do is do two here, just to keep it consistent. You know, if you're doing this, that's maybe took you a half an hour to do that, you maybe want to consider doing it bit by bit just to get even lift, especially on the back of the head, because that's why I always start my foils on the back. It's easy just to bring your client to the basin and get those foils rinsed while the others are developing. So sometimes when I'm doing my freehand painting and sometimes when I'm doing foliage, I'll always start at the front, just because that's where I want the lightener to be on longest and that's where I want it to be the lightest, which is a bit contradicting to what I'm doing here. So I'm always starting at the back here and then gradually bumping up my developer to get lightness towards the front.
Do you not find that the lowlights fade after time and go warm?
It just depends on your choice of colour. It depends what you use. 9 times out of 10, your lowlights will fade, and 9 times out of 10 they probably will be warm. But it's just being able to kind of tweak that so they don't lift as warm, and maybe just introduce the warmth into the hair rather than try have it super flat. If it's dimension that your client wants, then you've got to maybe suggest to them that they've got to come away from that ashy tone and start adding a bit warmth to the hair. Because if your client's a natural flat 7, there's no way that you could add a flat 7 to a blonde without it looking muddy or washed out. You know, you've got to kind of obviously add that warmth to fill it out.
What would be your go-to colours for adding depth? Would you use Colour Touch or Coldstone?
I use Colour Touch all the time. I never use permanent when I'm adding lowlights, because permanents I tend to stay away from a lot, because if you're adding lowlights, there's a big chance that you're going to be highlighting over those lowlights. If not the next time, maybe the time after that. And it's a lot easier to lift out a semi-permanent colour than it is a permanent colour. Plus, if you're adding a permanent colour as a lowlight, you're going to have a permanent regrowth on that lowlight area, so it's going to grow out quite solid. Whereas although the Colour Touch do fade slightly, you're not going to have any regrowth. You know, you're not going to have any solid lines of where you applied your colour. It'll fade and soften into the colour.
Would you ever clarify a client's hair before bleaching?
Sometimes, yeah, it just depends. We're quite lucky where we are. We don't have any issues with like hard water or lime scale and things like that. I know in Dublin it's a massive issue, so they're using like the Malibu Sea Crystal Cleanse before they even consider colouring. Sometimes if I want to really prep the hair as such for like a big colour correction, or if I'm dealing with overuse of silver shampoo, things like that, then I would consider doing it, yeah. But what I do sometimes as well is, if it is just like the overuse of silver shampoo, you can almost clarify it just after highlighting, just for a few minutes on the ends, just to cleanse it out.
Now when you're folding this foil, you don't get any product on the needle, no?
If I do get any on it, you can see there is a tiny bit of product on it, but when I open this and tuck that right in,
that's when you're wiping it.
That's when it's wiped, so it's gone. So I'm just working off this point here. This is where I want that last foil to obviously be horizontal. So we're still at a bit of an angle here. So we have between here and there to get that sort of gradually straightened out.
Is this your normal technique for highlighting every full head that you do?
Yeah, so this is just my go-to for everything really. You'll see if I was to do a full head, this is my technique. If I was to do a half head, it would be this minus the back. Do you know, you'll be able to take from it how to do a full head, a half head and a T-bar section in this style. If I'm doing like a platinum card, that means like if every single hair is going in a foil and we're taking our client from like blonde to brown, I would change the section. And the reason I've sectioned like this is because it just allows depth to live in certain areas, and it creates a really nice highlighted effect. It just doesn't look stripy and highlighted. That's what I love about it. It just camouflages any foil lines that you may have added, especially at the client's part. I think there's nothing worse than seeing like your stripy foils.
Does Colour Touch work for greys for you?
To a certain percentage, yeah. I've got some clients that are almost like 60% grey and it still covers. Although in saying that, I've got some clients that are 20% grey and I get root glow if I use it. You know, it may not cover perfectly. So, yeah, it just really depends. It's almost like trial and error with me. I would nearly rather have, if a client has very little grey, if my client has maybe say 10, 15, 20% grey, and I use Colour Touch and it colours it maybe 80, 85%, I would rather work off that than use Collison and go in with a permanent. You know, like, I would much rather use a semi-permanent and not get full coverage than use a permanent and run the risk of then banding and, you know, going darker over time. And it's just a lot easier for me to work with semi-permanent. I think once you go permanent, there's kind of no turning back.
Well, you saying you always do the hairline no higher than 4%. Do you still do the hairline last? And does it always lift light enough?
So yeah, I'm gonna do. No, I've done the hairline first. So I have the hairline in here now at the minute, and then I'm obviously gonna, when I'm doing these sides, the hairline's gonna be in processing, so it'll be in long enough. I don't do it last, but I don't do it first either. You know, I don't go and do the whole hairline first. So yeah, it will be light enough. So I'm going to just bring these two sections together now. You can see I'm just taking that straight across to match in with this foil that I've just put in.
Do you always do this textured weave on every client, or do you sometimes do finer weaves?
No, sometimes I do finer. Sometimes I'll do finer and I'll do them a lot more packed together. Again, it just depends on what result you're looking. So what I want today is more of like a dimensional textured kind of blonde rather than a traditional highlight that just gives coverage. I want to still allow some dark to live in between.
What do you find is the difference between Framer's foil and other foils that you might use?
Framer foil for me is just has the strength. It's good and sturdy, so when I'm holding it down and painting like that, I've no issues of, you know, the brush going through the foils. Some are quite flimsy, and they just sit quite sturdy. You know, they sit good and solid. They don't bend too easy. And they're quite easy to fold as well. Plus they look good. A lot of other foils are just all silver, so it's nice to add a bit of colour when you're highlighting. So now I'm gonna take these straight across and work up to the crown. What I probably could have done is, if my client was going super blonde to the root, I would maybe take another one or two each side. But because I'm not really focusing on getting a massive amount of lightness to the root. I'm not bothered if I drop a little bit out either end here. But that's another thing about the Framer foil as well, is the width of it. You know, regular foils are maybe that width, whereas Framer just allows you to take wider sections. Just saves time really.
Do you ever use heat to help with lightness?
Yeah, sometimes. When I trained, I was never trained to use heat. So it wasn't something that I would always go to, but this past few months I've started to dabble with it and just add a little bit of heat, and just helps speed up in some areas. It would just be adding heat to specific areas to maybe help along with the process, but no, generally I leave long enough in between my colours that I don't need to use heat and I don't need to rush the lightness. I can just let the hair lift naturally.
If you were doing a platinum card, how would you change the sectioning pattern?
Honestly, I would just try find a way that would be easy for you to add your foils in at a straight line. You know, you want to go horizontally with everything, so I would just take everything straight up. And I wouldn't be worrying about adding the angle along the parting either, because everything's going to be lightened, so you're not going to have lines, so you're literally packing everything in. So I would just take them straight along the part.
Would you still do textured weaves even if you weren't doing a root melt?
Again, it just depends what I'm looking to achieve. If I'm looking like more of a textured multi-tonal colour, then yes. But if I'm looking just blonde coverage on like your traditional blonde client, then no, because it's gonna leave out some depth in some areas, and you might wanna have coverage rather than depth.
How long do you process the foils once you've finished?
So usually it kind of works that once I'm finished, if the back aren't ready to be rinsed, they're pretty close to it. So generally I'll be done this whole process. The back foils are either ready or near ready to come out, and then I kind of just work it bit by bit. I'm always just watching different sections. Then after the back, the sides can come out, and then generally I'm waiting on the last two sections last. So it just really depends on what lift I'm looking, what developer I've used. But I don't, that's what I'm saying, I don't stress about time. I'm always leaving enough time that if it do needs to sit another 10-15 minutes, it's no issues.
So if this were a client in the salon, how long would you book out for the service?
So I would book out about 2 hours and 15 for application, and then I would probably have at least an hour and a half for developing. Then it just depends really. If I knew that they were getting a root shadow, so for today, what I'm doing today, if I was to book it out in the salon, it would be 2 hours 15 application, about an hour and a half, an hour and 45 processing, then another half an hour for me to apply the root colour, root melt, toner, then another half an hour processing, and then obviously I give an hour for a cut and blow dry then, or whether just a blow dry and style.
Would you class this as standard full head highlights service, or do you have a different name for it?
Well, it's not a standard full head service, no, because I'm going to be adding the blonde tip outs as well. So I don't really add a name to it. It's a full head and tip out. So it's just adding maximum lightness while retaining dimension. You know, I could have packed these foils in a lot closer, but I don't want to remove all this depth from that midsection. I want more gradual lightness towards the ends. So that's why I'm adding the tip outs rather than pack more foils in.
In that hour and a half that you're letting the colour build, do you do another client?
yeah, so I definitely do. People call it double booking. I just call it normal booking. You know, it's just the way I've worked all the time. And it's the same with a lot of salons over here. I think it's more America and Australia where you're kind of paying by the hour. So you're gonna just have one client in at the one time, which is totally fine if you're in America and charging $80 an hour, but not over here. So you've got to double book. Plus, it just keeps you busy in between each client as well. I would always book my clients in between, knowing that I would have enough time. You know, I wouldn't book a color like this and then another color like this in between. It would just be chaos. So I would always do maybe like a balayage refresh or a half head highlights or something that I know I would be capable of fitting in that time. So that is the back of the head foil. So you can see that I've worked obviously in at the angle of the hairline and then gradually went more horizontal. Then the last 3 foils just straight across the top. What I'm going to do now is mix up some lightener and then add some tip outs to these. So we're just adding some lightness to these ends.
We're coming up to 1 hour as well. Just under.
Okay, cool. So what time are we on?
10:15.
Okay, so
50 minutes.
I'm gonna end this live video now. We're gonna get it saved. It takes about 5 minutes. I'm gonna get some fresh color mixed up, and then we'll be going live again from this page in about 5 minutes. So just bear with us, and we'll be right back.